of a progress do you think this new policy represents in terms of respecting everybody's choice in participating in the International Olympic Games? Mr. Feng.
Well, apparently that IOC trying to make some new guidelines for the athletes to participate in Olympic Games, and also this is the first time for me to hear about that. And this means that there will be more transgender athletes participating in the Olympic competition. Probably it's a good thing.
Probably, that's an interesting word you use over there, certainly reflecting your attitude to a certain extent. Mr. Pusey, Simon, would you like to help us more of your understanding of this new policy? Really, is it as important as the media is trying to portray?
Yeah, I think it is important because for a long time, well, until now really, there's been a real grey area in this issue, and it means that this certain portion of society has been excluded really, or it's been very hard to know whether they can compete in the Games. And obviously everything about the Olympics is about inclusion and fairness and letting people compete. So I think it's important that these guidelines did come out and that there's a little bit more sort of clarity as to what can happen in the Olympics and in international competition. As you mentioned in your report there, these are guidelines, they're not rules, but it's to help the various federations around the world come to some kind of an agreement and arrangement and work out a few more rules and regulations surrounding this issue, because so far a lot of people, I think transgender people, who have just been excluded really just in their thought process as to whether they could compete at all. So I think that this gives it a bit more clarity, and it hopefully opens the doors. I think it's still very early stage. I think we'll see a lot more changes in the future surrounding this issue, but it's very early stage, but it is at least going some way to allow people to compete who are transgender.
Mr. Feng, you have been an expert in track and fields. Yeah. We had our conversations many times during the Beijing Olympic Games back in the year 2008. But the thing is, how much will this bring fairness into the competition? Is this only for a very small minority of athletes that we are talking about? Are there even more important rules, suggestions, recommendations that should be coming out of IOC regarding some of the other groups, not necessarily just about transgender, which is a very minor group, even though their rights should be respected. But many would wonder, how much effort should we put on this, and how much effort should we put on some of the very important aspects of fair competition also that the IOC should work on?
Yeah, I think the fairness of the competition is a very important thing for all the sports, and for the transgender athletes to participate in competition. So we should consider how we can guarantee the fairness of the competition, because I personally believe that for these transgender athletes, they may have some advantage because of course, this is quite different from event to event. For some event, for example, before they do the transgender, they might be already quite taller than the women. So when they come
you are talking about men to women, transgender.
Yeah, men to women, male to female, I mean. So in this case, they might be taller. For some of the sports, for sure, it's obviously that they have some kind of advantage. And also consider the length of the legs and the length of the arms, or even the size of the hands.
Bone density, for example, many of the issues.
Yeah, etc. So, and also another point, I really wonder how can IOC to control or to test the level of so-called testosterone level, because this one is really important
for at least 12 months. Some say even as long as 2 years it has to be, so that the test can be accurate.
Yeah, I know, but how often they will test and how can they make sure all these athletes to be in that case, that situation? So this is a critical thing. I think that there are
how much resources they would like to, they can put into all of these tests.
That's right.
And the follow-up. And will that eventually serve the purpose of fair competition?
That's
these
right.
are all very eligible questions. Simon, what's your thought about all of these questions?
Well, this was done on medical grounds. This wasn't done on any kind of rules or regulations from a kind of administrative point of view. This
exactly.
was a scientific consensus paper done by scientists and by people who certainly know a lot more about this in terms of the medical perspective than I do. But I do think you're right, there will be questions over fairness, there will be rumour and speculation when the next Games comes along, and if transgender athletes do compete and do well or don't do well, there will be people talking. And I think, like I said earlier, this is a very early stage. This is starting the sort of process of talking about it. I think it's very important to start that stage off, but I think there are a lot more questions to answer, and I think the advice and the recommendations will change as a result.
And Simon, also related to this, we all understand the scientific discovery, scientific recognition. At certain stages, we see it changes. What we consider as fair today may not be fair as our scientific development continues to move on for tomorrow. So what we are having is fair competition. That is always the slogan of the Olympic Games. And we've also seen gold medals were being taken away from certain athletes, even though they won the gold medal for, let's say, already decades, but still taken away because that was considered later as unfair competition. So once again, is this kind of recommendation likely to be sustainable? As science develops, as we understand the human bodies better, as we understand the process and results of transgender as a scientific phenomenon better in the future, Simon?
Yeah, well, you refer to medals being taken away. That's obviously mainly for doping reasons, and retrospectively you look back and you realize that athletes were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. And I think it's important that we evolve as a society, and especially in sport and athletics, to match sort of society in general. And as scientific processes get better and technologically more advanced, then I think it's important that associations like the IOC keep up with those advancements. Yeah, I think it is important that we continue to evolve and we don't stay. You can't just make rules and say, right, this is it now. You know, this, as technology and as we gain more understanding, we need to sort of change and adapt with that. So I think that's what's happening here, and I think it's important to do that. But is it sustainable? Yeah, I think it is. But I think you need to keep renewing and looking at the changes. These changes really came about because of society, because of society's values, and because of various things like the person you mentioned in the report there, the American athlete there, but also Bruce, Caitlyn Jenner. I think that had a really big impact as well, and also Chand, the Indian sprinter. These sort of test cases really do change things, and I think as we see more of them, the rules and regulations, the guidelines and advice will change.
We've seen some really new experiments. For example, Pistorius, even though he ran into some law case later, but his participation into the track and field competition in the Olympic Games was something unprecedented. Of course, that led to a lot of debates, and these issues could also be new possibilities for competitors. But Mr. Feng, will this create a possibility of increasing the number of transgender athletes inside the Olympic Games? And if that is the case, what does that mean for the others? And what would these kind of regulations or recommendations mean for minority groups like the transgender athletes? There are other groups, may not be transgender, but other groups of very specific qualification. What would these recommendations mean for all of them? Will the IOC be able to come up with recommendations after recommendations about one and very little group of every one of them?
Yeah, but I'm not sure about that. But at least for these transgender athletes, I think that if they really got a chance for those, I mean, from male to female transgender athletes, if they really get a chance to compete in Olympic Games, and if in the future, for example, in this year's Rio Olympics or the another 4 years later, another one. We can see some transgender athletes can get gold medal or good performances. There might be big
question marks.
Attract more athletes to go in this way. That's one of the possibility I'm thinking. So we'll see that the key issue is that once again, so the IOC have to control this and have to do the adequate test to make sure that these transgender athletes will compete in a fair conditions with those true female or the male athletes.